opportunities that, changed the trajectory of my life in regards to, what I want to do as a content creator and as a creative. And I also want to give a shout out to Chase Conley because he's been following the page way before, I even got in contact with Carl. So like he's been a major supporter as well. So, like everyone else up here, I'm really big into storytelling as well. I would grow up watching Saturday morning cartoons on like ABC7 or like Channel 5 and just always really enjoyed watching cartoons. It's always been a big comfort for me. Um, I went to school for global media and communications. I have a double master's in that. So again, storytelling, whether it's Western media or the global South, has always appealed to me. And then once I graduated, I kind of just dove back into animation, but I didn't realize you didn't necessarily need to be an artist to be in animation. There are so many other career paths you can take. So being there and getting to Nickelodeon, I realized that I could be on the executive side. And within the animation community, it's really small, but it's also very much still very kind of closed off, especially to people that look like us, people of color. And that's always been a passion point for me, is really just being one of the dot connectors, really getting people with unique voices into spaces that they wouldn't necessarily be in before. So as an executive and on the network side, I really value being able to like bridge that gap and take in pitches and just listen and see how we can get our stories out to the larger world. So that being there and seeing that you could be on that side and still have a creative input as well really appealed to me. So that's kind of how I ended up on this side of animation. But even to this day, like I'd much rather watch an animated show than watch something that's live action. Like that just gives me so much more satisfaction for some reason. So yeah. All those are great answers. How did I get started? I mean, like initial inspirations. Uh, there's a few things, but I was a latchkey kid when I was young. I grew up with my grandparents when I was really young, and they were working all the time. So most of the time, my grandfather would go into town and get like medication from the pharmacy, and back then they still had comic books on spinner racks. You know what I mean? You could buy comics anywhere at that point. So that was my initial inspiration, and I was like, when I read it, I was like, yo, this is what I want to do. At least in some form, I enjoyed it, how imaginative it was, and I always say that back then, I'm dating myself, but like in the sense of like back then, back in the good old days, um, the highest form of tangibility that you could see certain ideas were comic books, right? Because movies weren't there yet, video games weren't there yet. So that was kind of my first, endeavor as far as that's concerned. And I just knew what I wanted to do. But around the mid '90s, they had Anime Saturdays on Sci-Fi Channel, which was the first block of anime in the States, like, in terms of cable TV. And then they showed Ninja Scroll, Wicked City. They showed Ninja Scroll, that was a little too wild. They showed Demon City, Shinjuku, and Casher, and all these dope OVAs that Ghost in the Shell, tons of stuff that are like iconic, masterpieces now. And they would show them like back to back on Saturdays. So yeah, that was my initial like spark where I was like, yo, I want to do this. And I saw Ninja Scroll when I was in fourth grade, which is a wild story. My mom, we had illegal cable for my neighbor. And so like whatever you would watch on Channel 4 is what you would see. Like whatever they watched on their VCR tape, we would see that on our Channel 4. And so they had a tape of Ninja Scroll. And I was like, yo, this is out of control. And I was forever changed at that point. So yeah, at that point, my life's journey was to kind of just make content that was as potent as the stuff that inspired me. So I spent kind of going headfirst into that as far as the last 20 something years. So and in the midst of that, I've been able to work on a lot of cool stuff. So now I know you guys have probably seen so many changes in your journey and throughout the industry, but I would love for you guys to talk about how has AI impacted animation. Thanks, Rob. I don't know if it's necessarily impacted it directly yet, but as far as like speaking from a union member, one is one I feel like it's going to be caught up in litigation for a while, right? Because you got all these AI companies that they illegally scrape stuff, so you can't copyright it.
So as far as like major studios are concerned, I don't know if they would ever, their legal departments would allow them to jump into, using animation as far as that's concerned, because they're opening up themselves to a lawsuit, right? Until that stuff is settled, which might take like 5 years. So, but as far as other aspects and stuff, like so the homies like Phil Botte and Mikey Wandi, Aldous Hodge, like they founded 9B, which is like a concept art studio. They do work on tons of feature films and stuff like that. A lot of opportunities that they give junior artists. And I mean junior not so much in skill, but maybe lacking experience, right? So a good way to kind of like uh, give them a job that they can handle and is producible would be like pitch packet artwork. And that's the first thing. That was the first thing to go. So if you get like a real professional pitch packet, that deck might cost about 10 grand, right? Depending on what you got going on, right? You got to hire artists to draw backgrounds, characters, all that kind of stuff, and fill out all these things to get an executive excited about, a project. Now writers are just like, I'm just gonna use Midjourney. You know what I mean? So now that's like all those jobs, that they were able to kind of give people experience and stuff like that. Those were the first things to go. And as a writer, I kind of understand if you're like, I'm just trying to get like some art that's gonna pop and make somebody excited about it. But I do see studios now outsourcing everything overseas. Like that's an interesting thing too. So, and they don't have unions. So if they outsource to a company where AI is legal, what are you gonna do? I've heard rumors that, and I love Demon Slayer, but Ufotable, I heard they use AI for the effects animation. You know what I mean? So it's stuff like that. So it's like, but I do think in certain instances, I mean, it seems appealing, right? But until they can get litigation finished and legislation catches up to it, um, it's going to be interesting in the next 5 years. I know for a fact that we have meetings with the guild in LA coming up soon, the negotiations and stuff in regards to AI, because it's taking. I mean, storyboarding is our story departments. They feel like they may be the last to be affected. I don't believe that though. I think it's all going to be affected once they open up the new version. It gets better every time too. I messed around with the Niji. Um, uh, I don't know what you call it. It's like that setting in Midjourney that just pumps out stuff like AI art. It's pretty, like anime style art is pretty crazy. I check into it and shed a single tear, the glory tear. My lip quivers and shit, but I'm like, okay, it's cool. But that's kind of my thoughts on it. I think it was interesting to see, but until legislation catches up, I don't see studios using that stateside. So, but like I said, they're outsourcing all the jobs. So not all of them, but they're outsourcing a lot of jobs as well. Just to different things, and especially as anime becomes more prominent as far as the marketplace is concerned. But so you'll see a shift. Those are my thoughts on it. I don't know if that's helpful at all.
That was helpful. I want to jump into like it's interesting seeing different artists on Instagram because I'll follow a lot of artists and they'll be vocalizing about the fact that like a lot of AI is definitely like ripping off their own art styles and just kind of replicating that, and that's how you're seeing the AI art that's being created. It's not anything necessarily original. It's just AI going in and kind of just stealing people's signature art styles, and then people are like, oh, this is really cool. AI did this really fast. But the reality of it is that it's definitely just like artists who take hours and days to complete their kind of stuff and come up with that signature art style that's being replicated so quickly now. So I definitely think there needs to be something done about that for sure. In terms of the studio side, like there's something so important about just like the issue, at least not currently, but it is interesting to see how like AI has really just made everyone's lives easier and we're kind of just getting normalized to it and comfortable with it. Like even just with like Chat GPT and just like talking to Siri and just like I think Gemini that just came out, like just seeing those commercials and how it's just kind of like slowly becoming a part of our daily lives. It'll be interesting to see how it kind of goes into the creative in the future too.
Well, I think the response to AI is a lot more important than the impact of it. One thing that Carl always says and has said it publicly is that whether AI stays or whether it goes, whether everything works out with these unions and the strikes, we need to focus on not always utilizing the Hollywood system
And basically, what he's trying to say is independence. Independence is the best response to AI because it's best to be able to fund your own projects, create your own projects without having to rely on, the studios. You have more leverage when you go into these buildings and you have a product like a Game of Thrones or something that was an IP that you created and that you already have a foundation because you have a fan base. So it just makes that process a lot easier when you want to negotiate. So if you want to negotiate terms of making sure that they're not using AI generated artists or animation, you can probably do that in your contract. But either way, the one of the main goals of Martian Blueberry is to make sure people realize that the best way to own and control your narrative and your IP is by being an independent content creator and then just do partnerships. So with a lot of artists in the music industry, what they'll do is they'll have a 50-50 partnership with a record label where they'll just use the record label for distribution and then the artists will handle everything on their side. So a lot of times we need to realize that we can use Hollywood, but it doesn't always have to be a one-sided relationship. So I think the response to AI should be us creating our own content and not being in so much of a rush to pitch to Hollywood because Hollywood's not going to always give you, whatever investment you're looking on in return.
Um, on my end, I think if it gets better, it's definitely gonna get worse first, like a lot. And it is improving and learning and quote unquote stealing every day. It's getting better in every way from a story standpoint. Eventually, they would get to a point where it's coming up with a story, it's making it, it's doing everything. And I can definitely see in this digital age where all of a sudden you have a bunch of people watching a show that's completely fully AI and loving it and supporting it because there are a lot of casual people who don't pay attention to any of these conversations, and they're just going to consume because that's what they do. And so it's always going to be difficult. And I do think there's a place for AI the same way as years have gone by, digital tools have helped make life easy in many ways. It's just that maybe AI is just extremely severe, and obviously it's learned from artists, and those artists haven't gotten any compensation and all of that. So, but I do think that it is possible that even if that day comes, and I don't even think it's that far at all. I don't think it's that far at all. I think the AI is going to learn how to tell good stories and put it out there. It might not even have to look animation. It could even look live action. We won't be able to tell the difference, or at least it'd be very different. There are people who I can see an AI image and know it's AI, at least for now. But like a casual person, not all of them. Not all of them. So, but I do think there is a world where maybe a little bit to what you mentioned, where there would be value in completely human-made stuff still. I, I, I can see a world where that's the case, where once you can communicate what the problem is and how people are supporting, because people don't mind supporting something they truly appreciate, something that helps their life in any way, even if it's just entertainment or escapism. The same thing with like a Patreon or whatever. I think there's value to human created stuff. It allows people to be more connected, and I think that's something that AI would. Now that's something that maybe they can never replicate. But are they coming? Yes. And it's going to be painful, but I think there will still be value in human stuff.
I do want to go back a little bit to what Chris was saying and talking about working with Hollywood. I want to know how you guys are able to find that balance of keeping your creative vision but also collaborating with writers and directors and everyone else.
Well, I guess you would be the best person to ask. You're the OG in the game.
That's the baton. It's interesting. I think it depends on a lot. Like every project is not made equal, right? So and then it depends on like what your role is in that project. If you're the showrunner and it was your idea, you'll get a lot of creative control. I think that the studio was going to be there for a level of checks and balances in most situations, and depending on how experienced you are, depends on sometimes how much they will engage or just trust you. And then also, depending on your relationship with them that you foster, you may speak their language, right? And so you know exactly how to appeal to them. Um, so you have that angle as well. I think that it also depends on your position too, you know. So, but let's say like as a director, right? I get a script, and let's say I'm working on X-Men, essentially. That's a huge IP, and then working on that IP, right? It's like so much brand recognition, and this also was Disney's first X-Men anything since getting the rights back. They will choke the life out of an idea time to time. You know what I mean? Because they're so scared to move in a general direction. They just want it to hit right. And then on top of that, you add the fact that it's a continuation of another idea, right? So you have a group of execs. I'm gonna just keep it real. You got a group of execs, and this is not a knock to them. It's just their sensibilities are not based in like anime, and anime to them is a visual aesthetic, which essentially represents certain visual tropes and things like that. But truth be told, from a philosophical standpoint, anime is an aesthetic in its economy, right? In a way that you create animation with tricks and things like that to keep costs down, et cetera, et cetera. And that just developed into like a visual language, right? You know, from old school parallaxing, multi-plane sliding elements and that kind of stuff, right? But there's also high-end sakuga and high-end animation that you see in current series now. And but when you say anime to an executive that is so far on the outside, on the peripheral of that, it gets them scared because they're thinking like, oh, you're gonna make it all sharp and all this stuff. And it's like, no, it's first off, I need you to step your game up because you haven't watched enough. Like, you come my neck like that. You don't come to me like that, right? So it's like, look, have you seen Ghost in the Shell? Have you seen Jinro? Have you seen these things where it's staged cinematically? The drawings look like real people. You know, it's staged like cinema. And there was an age of animation where essentially those directors were influenced by cinema. Whereas I feel like a lot of anime has grown into its own thing, but a lot of it is like regurgitation of other anime. It's like photocopy sloppy, you know what I mean? It's dope though, because it's developed into its own thing, but you don't see the same kind of authorship, and then when you do, those things are hits, right? They rise to the top. But you know, explaining that to somebody that doesn't have that reference point is difficult. So you always got that battle. You're kind of, you know, there's friction there throughout the whole process, and you get more and more trust as things become more successful. But yeah, it all depends on your position. If you're a storyboard artist, I mean, as far as collaborating, the only person you're really collaborating with is the director, who is the buffer between you and the showrunner and the executive, and you're just trying to execute that vision. And so, as a good director, collaborating with a board artist, that's a hard job. Like if you got like an action show, it's the hardest department, in my opinion, right? You got the cerebral aspect of like the storytelling, cinematography, pacing, all that stuff, shot selection, all these things. It's also the most rewarding job because you have the most impact on the show. I feel like if you work in story, you know, it's not just the same as designing characters, and a lot of that's a very appealing job. But if you want to have impact on the show, now you can set up how the show moves. You know, you can. It's way more influence over the final product. But I say that to say, you essentially you want to have a board artist be invested in their work, right? It's very difficult, so you want to allow them to kind of do them too, right? So there's a compromise there, and I think a good collaborator knows when to kind of dial back as well to allow that person to shine, because you want their investment, you want them to be emotionally invested in it and take ownership in it as well. And I think that's at any level as far as collaboration is concerned. So that's my general sentiment on that.
I was gonna say, just jumping off what Chase is saying, it's very much like a relationship-based collaboration, and it does vary from project to project. Like on the IP side, like he was saying, the franchise side, if it's a really well-known property, there's definitely going to be a lot more eyes on it from the top all the way down to the bottom in terms of the network side, just because it's something that has a lot of value and represents basically who that network is. It also comes down to like if it's a co-production, say for instance, Nickelodeon is making a show with Netflix. Now you also have eyes from Netflix kind of on the show as well because it's eventually going to be on that streaming platform. Versus an original show, which is more so the creator's idea, is pretty new. You can take some more chances with it. That will have less eyes on it, be less pressure on the show, and you can kind of have more of a creative freedom with it because you're coming up with something from scratch essentially. So yeah, it really does just depend from project to project, but it is a lot about just trusting the people that are on the team, you know, like the showrunner, the executive producers, the writers, the artists, like that's something that's all like generated and crafted from the very start. And like if you're hiring people and putting those people in the right place and you have a lot of trust in them and they're really confident in what they're doing, most of the time it's just us looking at stuff and being like, that's amazing. Like we don't enjoy like giving notes and having to like tweet things and tell people like, okay, let's go back and revise that. We're very excited to see what the creatives are doing because we know we can't necessarily do it. Like we have a good sense and sensibility based on who's working on the show of like what the vision should be, but it's fully about just like trusting the creatives and having the confidence that they know they're going to execute in it, and we're just excited to see what they have to do. So.
And not only is it varies from different productions, but also networks. You know, Carl talks about how on Adult Swim, for the most part, not all the time, but most times, they were able to do what they wanted, you know, creatively when it came to the Boondocks. But when he started working on other networks, he noticed he would get pushback. So there's always going to be notes, no matter what. You know, good, bad, or indifferent. There's always notes. But sometimes there are going to be those moments where you're getting a lot more pushback than what you're used to, and that's the part you really have to learn how to pick and choose your battles. Because what happens is if you push back too much when they're trying to, you know, take a aspect of your creativity out of the situation, you can become labeled as hard to work with, and then that's when you get into those conversations of being blackballed. That's when, you know, you might lose opportunities, get fired, you know, those types of things. So you want to be very, very careful when it comes to actually fighting the networks or whoever's in charge of, you know, the final product. You just want to, you know, be able to pick and choose those battles because it really can determine your future. Because if you end up playing ball and doing what they want you to do, you might end up being able to work on another project with a bigger budget and things like that. So I just wanted to share that with you guys because a lot of people don't know that there's a lot of ways to, you know, a lot of pitfalls, you know, and a lot of dead ends that they don't warn you about. They don't tell you about. There's no roadmap, you know, to this thing called life. But specifically working in Hollywood, it doesn't take much to burn a bridge or, you know, be looked at as get blacklisted and things like that. So you just want to be very careful on how you do it. But at the same time, you still want to, you know, keep your soul because there's a lot of people who work in the industry that lose that passion the more and more projects that they worked on and they had less creative control and now they're just doing it as a job. You know, it becomes a job rather. They don't have the passion that a lot of y'all have in here when it comes to wanting to follow your dreams, wanting to get your projects out there. A lot of times that gets lost once you've been, you know, desensitized to the actual process of, you know, working on a production. So I just and that varies case by case, and everyone's situation is different. So just always keep that in mind that that's one of the struggles you have to overcome and deal with if you actually want to work in the industry. And if you just want to be an independent creator that hires people under you, you're sometimes going to have to be that person when you have a co-writer that, you know, you're bringing them along for your project. You might have to tell them, hey, I don't want to do that. Let's do this instead. So the process of collaborating, you know, isn't always easy, but if you're able to come to a compromise, I think that'll always be a match made in heaven.
I was gonna say, just in terms of going back on what you said, picking your battles. Also, is learning how to pitch your idea, right? You know, you don't want to have an executive feel like you're just brushing off what they say, even though you may know it's right. There's sometimes where I'm like, you know what? Let's just do it their way first. so they can see it on their feet, and then I have a solution in my back pocket. So a lot of times they'll see it and they're like, oh, you know what, it's not working for me. And it's like, I feel the same. So here's my solution. And they're like, okay, cool. Because then they feel validated as well. It's like, okay, you listened to what I said. You didn't just try to like throw away my notes. Because a lot of times they're seeing it from a global, from the macro. And, if it's a structured thing that's bumping them or something like that, or some culturally relevant thing, it is always nice to just know how to present that idea.
And also what it does is it pushes you creatively. So now you have to sit back and, go back to the drawing board and find it. Did my mic go out? Now you gotta find another way to, how can I get this idea out? But so it's like just from creative, I guess, training in a creative way. I'm thinking like, Dragon Ball Z, like Goku always finds a way to surpass his limits. Right. And sometimes whether it's directly or indirectly, that's how these studio execs can be an asset to you, is because they're pushing you creatively. So if they tell you no here, or figure something else out, you're gonna be able to open up those parts of your brain that you never even were able to access until that moment happened, because you kept getting told yes, so they kept approving it. So you didn't have to flex those muscles. So it does, and it's a double-edged sword. That's basically what I'm saying in a nutshell. But at the same time, you just gotta know when is the right time to push back and when's the right time to fall back.
Just piggybacking off of what everybody says, I think has been covered thoroughly. It is a muscle. It is something that you learn over time. The whole thing with picking your battles, or just knowing who you're talking to, knowing who your audience is, and how to communicate with them to get the best results. In many ways, it's a challenge, and it's something that, just like most things in life, the more you do it, the better you are at it. So to some degree, everybody here is familiar with it, collaborating in some capacity. It's not always animation. It could be literally anything, any job, anything. And at the end of the day, you're dealing with people, so you're also tasked with understanding people you work with, how to get the best out of them, how to get the best out of the team, how to communicate the best way possible to get what you need to have done, be done. And so just piggybacking off of that, I think everybody's pretty much covered it thoroughly.
I was just gonna say, as much as like this is a visual medium, like the industry that we're in, it is a lot of conversations that happen like on a day-to-day basis, and you have to know how to talk to people and who you're talking to, and just knowing how to work together. So having those communication skills is really an important part of the industry as well.
Now, I know we definitely have a lot of passionate people in here. I definitely want to try to hit some of these questions before our panel ends. So if you guys have any questions, you want to pick their brains a little bit, maybe you guys could line up right next to the person in the black shirt, and I will walk over.
Just advocate for our stories and advocate for writers and artists that aren't necessarily in the room, but also bring my own experiences as a creative executive, more so to like the storytelling side and the visual side, just making sure that was all good. But as I've been there for longer, more Black people have come into the department. We've definitely gotten more Black writers and artists, and that's something that we definitely value as well. Just having that like diverse perspective, that unique perspective, and that's something that personally I advocate for all the time while I'm there. And I definitely see the shift as well, just in like me speaking up more and kind of giving perspective. It's kind of raised everyone else's awareness level, even if they aren't Black, which means that I just see as a whole, like perspectives are shifting, and there's not necessarily so much responsibility on us to have to do that heavy lifting and the work all the time, which I feel like is what is necessary. Like it shouldn't always just be a burden that's on our backs. Like it's something that should be everyone's responsibility, and everyone should be taking note of it, and it shouldn't be an afterthought. It should just be the standard, period. So I do see it shifting, even just looking at other shows that are coming out, just in TV as a whole. I feel like there has been a shift and just like more of a regard for our stories and like having that space for us. So I'm hoping it keeps going in that direction. Yeah.
I just want to add to that right quick. I think one of the biggest problems is Hollywood tends to use the success of other Black projects to determine the future of future Black projects. So like They saw how successful Black Panther was, and there was a moment there when they started giving more Black creatives opportunities. Died down again. George Floyd situation happens, not to be morbid. There was then afterwards Hollywood tried to do the same. Not just Hollywood, the entire world wanted to make sure that they was on the right side of history. Y'all noticed some time passed and went back to just being less of us. And another problem is we've been locked out for so long that a lot of those writers that came out that were working on shows, all those, remember the golden era of TV and film, the 90s, everyone always talks about 90s sitcoms, 90s movies. But a lot of those guys were never able to be groomed into becoming showrunners. A lot of them were never able to become executive producers, and what happened was that caused a void. So when they started looking for a lot of Black creatives like a Carl Jones, he was getting hired off a default just because they wanted to make sure that there was a Black face on, insert option A for the production, So I think that's another reason why I just want to keep stressing. That's the reason why we need to, be the change that we want to see. We can't wait for Viacom, and that's not a shade to you. Yeah, we can't wait for Turner. We can't wait for Disney. Don't get me wrong. We want to utilize these peoples, and Disney wasn't a shot at you either, Chase. um, that's the reason why it's best to definitely try to consider going the independent route, despite the fact that it takes longer. When Nipsey Hussle said the marathon continues, he meant that because it really is a marathon, but the reward is worth it at the end because eventually you will realize how far you came and how much control you have.
Definitely don't worry about taking the traditional route to get into this industry, especially as Black people. Like, a lot of the time, the animation schools and art schools that are out there, we're not necessarily going to those. Really focus on putting your content out there online because people that work at these big studios and stuff are looking that way as well and are willing to take chances on you if you're putting yourself out there. Like, there are people on the other side advocating for you all as well and being like, no, let's give a greener person, which just means someone who doesn't have as much experience, a chance. For instance, on one of the shows I just worked on, all of the co-story editors and showrunners on that show were green showrunners, and the show is literally a success, and that was their first time show running. So, and more teachable, exactly, and just it doesn't necessarily always come down to experience, because as you were saying, like, a lot of the time, people didn't have that mentorship, and they got stuck and siloed in these specific positions, which is why it's harder now to find, like, okay, let's try to find a Black showrunner, let's try to find a Black storyboard director, or director in general, they're nowhere to be found. So just really do keep navigating your own route and just kind of forging your own path. Like, there's no one specific way to get into this industry, and I just want to emphasize that. Just have that confidence in yourself and keep growing and learning. And when your foot gets in the door, just show off who you are, and there will be people that are willing to take those chances on you for sure. Thank you.
Hi guys, how you doing? My name is Avery. I'm an aspiring illustrator trying to get into, dip my toes to get into storyboarding and animation because I just love storytelling in general. You guys did infer about the challenges now you all are in experience with leadership positions. What are some of the pitfalls that you guys, or challenges with not only butting heads with the executives up top, but keeping morale with the crew on the bottom?
It's definitely a balance. Like, in my position as an executive on the executive team for a show, it very much is like we're seeing firsthand day to day how great the show is, and all the hard work everyone is doing, and it's kind of our job to pump the show up to the higher ups and be like, hey, look at how amazing this is. Let's keep it going, yada yada yada. And then at the same time, we're going back and kind of telling the creatives, because we know their communication style and how to talk to them, kind of what the notes were given to us and how we're trickling that down. So it's definitely a balancing act, having to navigate both the creative side, because I'm very much a creative on my own. Like, I make my own content, I write my own stuff, so I do have that creative brain, and in that way I know how to talk to a creative and kind of have their same sensibilities. At the same time, you do have to kind of put on that executive hat and kind of be the eyes for the network and the face for the network network side too. So it definitely boils down to just like communication at the end of the day and figuring out how to do that the best way possible.
And just right quick, also remember, like, don't be afraid to humble yourself too. Because if you're the new guy, or if you don't have as much experience as someone else, or if someone is giving you an opportunity, sometimes it's just best to, let things play out the way they play out. One example was Charlamagne hit me up and said, "Yo, I want to do a short story for Marvel. It's a Christmas story. I want to either do Ironheart or the character Blue Marvel. Y'all know those characters, right? All right. Shout out to Kevin Graveau, who created Blue Marvel, another mentor of mine. Basically, I came up with the concept of a Christmas story for Blue Marvel, and I sent it back to Charlamagne. He said, "Dope, I'm gonna give you a writing credit." And then he hit me back a few months later. He said, "Yo, fill in those thought bubbles." So when the project finally came out, didn't really get notified. Found out, because there's a lot of people who work in the industry that lose that passion the more and more projects that they worked on, and they had less creative control, and now they're just doing it as a job. It becomes a job rather. They don't have the passion that a lot of y'all have in here when it comes to wanting to follow your dreams, wanting to get your projects out there. A lot of times that gets lost once you've been, desensitized to the actual process of, working on a production. So and that varies case by case, and everyone's situation is different. So just always keep that in mind, that that's one of the struggles you have to overcome and deal with if you actually want to work in the industry. And if you just want to be an independent creator that hires people under you, you're sometimes going to have to be that person when you have a co-writer that, you're bringing them along for your project. You might have to tell them, "Hey, I don't want to do that. Let's do this instead." So the process of collaborating